Bless all the paths our feet walk to be free. Bless all the paths our feet walk to be free.
Of a previous condition. I mean, what are we doing when we say I want to resolve to do something? We're saying I want to change. We're saying I want it to be different than it was a moment ago, a day ago, a year ago. Well, why should I change? The world is so messed up, right? There's so many things going on in the world nowadays. Just listen to the news, how negative it is. There's more war now than ever. More people are dying in wars and battles. Teens are addicted to drugs and alcohol at alarming rates. Racism, homophobia, and religious prejudices is just as rampant as it was 50 years ago. Half the world's illiterate, and poverty is so bad that what's the point of learning to read anyway? All right, I'm done here. Leave you on a real good mood. Right? Why should I even make a personal resolution? Why am I resolving to do anything in the state of affairs like this? We hear it in the news every day, so what's the point? Well, or is it the point that the news is always just the bad news? Sometimes that's all they give us. And that could be a whole nother talk about that. But sometimes there's other news out there if you look for it. What about the news that the mainstream reporters don't tell you about? Here are 5 news stories that are barely reported. Now I use an article on cracked.com for this talk. Cracked.com. Yes. So all of this information is sourced. And if you want me to send you the link so you can source every single tidbit I'm about to tell you, because I'd be here with papers and papers and papers printing out all the different reports and statistics that this article is derived from. But first off, well, world peace is coming closer and closer, right? Is it? Or is that a joke? This one seems laughable. Mankind has gone from fighting with swords to muskets to machine guns, right up to the modern era of poison gas and nukes that can murder every human being on the planet in minutes. Mankind's technological growth has been marked mainly by increasingly efficient ways to slaughter each other. There we go. That's human resolve, right? Sure enough, the 20th century has had to have been the most violent in human history. 2 world wars, conflict in Southeast Asia, constant war in the Middle East, and those were just the ones that America was involved in. At the beginning of the 21st century, with Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and rumblings of war in Syria, it seemed like the world was a pack of rabid dogs. So how is world peace any closer? Well, the good news is that even with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the first decade of the 21st century saw the number of annual battle deaths at its lowest ever in history. Professor Joshua Goldstein put it best. If the world feels like a more violent place than it actually is, that's because there's more information about the wars, not more wars themselves. Overall, we are in the midst of an unheard of long peace, as no major powers have clashed since World War II, replacing them with smaller wars that historically would count as skirmishes. So the U.S. lost 3,400 soldiers in Afghanistan, which is terrible. I mean, it's 3,400 brothers and sisters that went home. But during the American Civil War, 4,700 troops were killed on one side of one single battle. But they didn't have the internet. They didn't have, they had a teletype, if that. So it wasn't being reported as widely. Here's a graph. Of the worldwide, the waning of war. So this is where it started in the 40s. And you can see the waning of war. And this is us in the 2000s. So obviously, this is worldwide. And again, all these statistics can be sourced if you want to look at this. But the numbers don't lie. This is the waning of battles and worldwide battle deaths per 100,000 people since the 40s. So that's proof right there that America's resolve, human resolve, to find a little bit more peace is happening. And again, the numbers don't lie. Property crime, theft, and burglary have also been dropping since around 1993. The D textbook, which is a book written by the writers of Cracked, has all these different articles and facts and figures that you would never think to look up. They're not really written anywhere about all the decreasing wars and violent crimes. With the information it has within it is saying you're just as safe leaving your doors open now as our grandfathers were back in the 50s. That half of the fear and the doom and gloom that we feel to lock the door, I lock my doors, is because I'm being programmed every day with the news too, saying crime, 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 theft, crime, theft. Well, in absolute numbers, more people did die violently in the 20th century than any other century, but that's because there are so many more people now as well. The chances that a person living in the 20th century would die violently were about 3%. That is a historical low number. It was 5 times higher in prehistoric societies. In tribal societies, war was a daily occurrence. Just the process of everyone settling down into a large-scale government, even violent ones, was an improvement on the everyday war that existed in humanity. If our hunter-gatherer ancestors could see us now, they'd be confounded by the complete lack of annual head smashing and face stabbing. Which I guess is a good thing. I mean, I really like to have my head smashed and my face stabbed. Free will universe again, if that's what you're into, but I won't come over for your party. But it's not just war. It's all violent deaths. In 14th century England, some cities had a homicide rate as 110 people per 100,000 citizens. London's homicide rate in 2012 was under 1 per 100,000. And we've previously talked about violent crimes dropping to historic lows, that even in a gun-crazy USA, no matter how you break it down, violence is going out of style. We were talking about the other day, Kim Ballou is going to be coming here, but she's also going to be kicking off the season of nonviolence. So this is infectious. Just as the coals we've been all sharing with each other this season, so is the love and the resolve to live in a peaceful war. It's a fine example of human resolve, and it's what we want. I mean, isn't that what we pray about here all the time? So doesn't it make sense, perhaps, that I have a sense of resolve, or maybe a firmness of purpose and intent for peace in my own life? That I resolve to be peaceful, that it starts right here. We sing the song, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with you. Yeah, me. So if that's my resolve, I can then be free of the bondage of the condition of I was in right before. After all, our wanting to be peaceful is happening right before our eyes. Well, except for the teenagers anyway. I mean, they're all doped up and on drugs, right? Why should I have resolution in my life if the future generation is all doped up? I mean, what's the point again? Why should I even bother? Have a little more volume. The good news, the National Institute on Drug Abuse has been surveying tens of thousands of high schoolers for 4 decades. And not only is drug use down, but almost every form of substance abuse is down. There's one big exception. Can you guys guess what it is?
Pharmaceuticals.
Marijuana. That's the only one that has gone up. Everything else has gone down. Otherwise, usage of the illicit drugs by high school students has been steadily falling for 7 years. And weed's growing popularity is hardly surprising, as the drug industry is closer and closer to legality and is generally viewed as not a big deal for most people under 65 and not wearing a badge. Basically, because the country's view on it is becoming more and more benign. But the kids are stopping the cigarettes, they're stopping the drinking, they're stopping the amphetamines. And not only kids not injecting hardcore narcotics anymore, they're also consuming alcohols at record lows as binge drinking continued its 5-year decline right into 2012. And teen smoking was the lowest in rate in 2012 as well. So if we want to say what's wrong with these kids today, we can say actually nothing. They're doing pretty good. Generationally, yeah. That shows the resolve of our teenagers. Perhaps we could take some lessons from our adolescent counterparts and make some real purposeful choices about our own addictions and resolve to free ourselves from the shackles of them in 2014. I mean, I can do that. But what's the point, Mark? What's the point of releasing my addictions and having the resolve to that if no one accepts me for who I am? We may be people of diversity here, but the rest of the world, well, they still may judge me if I'm gay, or if I'm in an ethnic marriage outside my own ethnic origin, or if I'm black or white or yellow or purple. I may be safe here, but the rest of the world I'm not safe in. Well, America is a country in which half a dozen states still celebrate Confederate History Month, dedicated to a memory of a government founded on the principle that God ordained one race of people to enslave another race of people. And yes, every few months we're going to see a racially charged story that will dominate the headlines, like Trayvon Martin and the Zimmerman case. But maybe it's not too surprising that nearly half the country believes race relations are getting worse. But the good news is, if compared to an ideal world free of prejudice, yeah, the current state of world affairs still sucks. If compared to a world free of any prejudice or judgment. But if compared to the actual world at any point in the past, things are looking great. For example, in 2013, 87% of Americans surveyed approved of interracial marriages. Just 50 years ago, over 90% of Americans disapproved. And while only 8% of U.S. marriages are between members of different races, that happens to be an all-time high. And despite its reputation as a bastion of backwards rednecks, Americans are more likely to accept neighbors of different races than are the citizens of other countries. We are the melting pot. We forget that. That's what America was about, that we wanted to be one people with everyone. This country was the country of diversity. That's what we should be really called, instead of the United States of America. But anyway, that's a different talk too. So, that's great too. But what about gay marriage? It's still illegal in half the states in the country. And that's true. The opinions are split right down the middle for gay marriage, 50-50, depending on whose polling you're trusting. But while half the country opposes a person's right to contractually chain him or herself to another person, because that's what we're doing, and our gay brothers and sisters have the right to do that too. They can be nagged at. The thing is, the approval rate has gone up 20% just since the Clinton years. So from something that was a 50-50 place in America in this point, 20 years ago or in the 90s, we were like more than half the country, more like 80% of the people did not approve of gay marriages. So again, the human resolve is moving forward more and more. So maybe it would be more prudent if, in our own personal resolve to move forward in 2014, we were to find some more room for tolerance. Maybe find tolerance for ourselves and all the mistakes we make and all the things we usually beat ourselves up about. That's usually what makes me be intolerant of you, is because I've been beating the crap out of me. So maybe in 2014, if I have just a little bit more resolve to be more patient with me, to be more gentle with myself, it's going to bleed out to the other people. And I'm going to just, by nature, be more tolerant of each other, be more tolerant of my friends. I mean, you can if you want to. Well, you don't really have to, because it's not like you're going to be reading about it anywhere. I mean, half the world's illiterate anyway. What's the point in me resolving to be more tolerant of you if half the world can't even read anyway? Who reads anymore? Go into a random teenager's room and you won't expect to see a single book. The kids these days always have their hands full with an iPhone, an iPad, or some game controller. Angry Birds and Candy Crush have replaced Tolstoy and Hemingway. However you want to say it, people don't read anymore because there's an app for that, and it's called TV, movies, and unfortunately pornography. There's a lot of time spent on the internet for kids looking at that lovely group of pictures. But the good news is, In reality, we live in the most literate world ever. Currently, about 99% of American adults can read and write, but that's only America. A better question would be, how is the rest of the world faring in the literacy department? The answer is also pretty impressive because, for an example, in India, and it's 1.2 billion people, 50 years ago, only 18% of them could have enjoyed the Twilight Saga. Now, over 60% of them can enjoy the Twilight Saga and enjoy the greatest love story ever told. Obviously, you know I'm not a Twilight fan. But worldwide as a whole, the figure is 84% literacy rate. That is amazing. That's amazing. So what are people doing with these new reading powers? Well, at least one survey suggests that nearly twice as many Americans are reading novels today compared to 60 years ago. Unlike the imaginary ideal 1950s living room, Mom and Pop weren't seated around the fire exchanging copies of the New Yorker and ruminating on the worlds of Fitzgerald or Steinbeck. In reality, they were probably listening to the radio and talking about how great segregation was. Yeah. Oh, and those kids with their noses buried in some internet-capable gadget, they're not just playing games and watching One Direction's videos. And hopefully Rose didn't hear that because she likes One Direction. They're reading. What are they reading? Well, they're writing, texting at a mind-boggling rate. Posts on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, message boards. It all adds up to what we're calling the new literacy. Think about it. For most of recent history, written communication left like that was reserved for the classroom. Once we left school, only a tiny fraction of our time was reading or writing, unless you were forced to read a book by your folks or something like that. English classes was thought of in much the same light as calculus today. A bunch of crap that none of us will ever need again. But all of that practice, as informal as it is, really adds up. And given the need for brevity in texts and Twitters, most of us are capable of concisely, perfectly articulating ourselves. We can narrow it down to get that message sent so we don't have to write a lot of gobbledygook. Well, that's high literacy rate. When you master the language enough to consolidate your thoughts to a small sentence so that they can get what you mean, your literacy rate went higher. And across the country, across the world, that has increased. So all that wonder going on, I believe it's only fair to say that I resolved to become more literate in the language of myself and my emotions. And that could be a resolve for 2014. Looking inside, getting to learn the language of you more. Are you illiterate about yourself? Are you illiterate about people? Most of the people in this room can read. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say 100% of the people in this room can read. But can you read you? Do you know the language of you? Do you know the language of your brothers and sisters, the person you're in your relationship with? Can you read them? "2014 may prove to be an enlightening year, freeing me and you from any of the misbeliefs I may have about myself. If I go inside and learn the language of me." There's many ways to do it. There's workshops, there's yoga, there's meditation, there's reading. There's many different ways to learn the language of yourself, and this could be probably the most important one of them. If you're going to have the resolve to go inside and do the work. Next week, I'm starting a 2-week series on your emotional body called Who, What, When, Where, Why, and How. And it talks about the language of you, of getting to know you. Workshops, again, a real quick way to get to know you. It's an intense workshop or weekend of getting to know you and what makes you tick. And if you didn't know it was in there, and you help them get it out so that you can understand the language of you. And as you understand the language of you more, you're going to understand the language of me, because we're all the same. Our stories may be different, but we all feel the same, the how of our feelings. So just be aware of that when you learn the language of you. Unless we all go broke anyway, and lose our homes to fall the victim of worldwide poverty that's sweeping the nation, then what would be the point of even learning how to read or do any kind of self-help work? I mean, for decades now, we've watched commercials that feature some retired actor stumbling through some impoverished village in some undisclosed location to make viewers feel bad enough to donate money. Feed the starving kid. What about the starving kid on the next block over? I know kids in Rosa's school that we know have a rough life, and we try to share with her and teach her. Not everybody has the same gifts in life. You know, some homes don't have the food and abundance we have to be grateful when we're eating and for the gifts we have. Considering that we're in a worldwide recession, the sensible question is, does any of this crap even make a difference? Well, here's the good news. Yes, even though lately it seems like the whole world is in a race to the bottom, the poorest of the poor are actually climbing out of the financial hole. From 1990 to 2012, the number of the world's extreme poor was cut in half. In case you're wondering what that would be the first significant global decline in poverty in history, ever. We're living in these times. And these aren't just statistical tricks. When they're calculated, they're not just counting income, they're accounting for the total living conditions, infrastructure, schools, access to clean water, everything. 1 billion people now have stuff for the first time. The part that gets me the most. Sorry. 1 billion people now have stuff for the first time that we've had our entire lives in this country. I grew up, I went to the sink to get water to wash my hands. I went to the potty, I went to this nice cozy room, sat down, I went to the potty. I didn't have to go out to the trees, the forest, and get some disease by some bug that bit me while I was taking a crap. The reality that we live in here is a very cushy, comfortable reality. We don't have to go live in India and suffer to know that. Some of you have. Hats off to you. I'll pass. I like indoor plumbing. It's funny that way. But we have to recognize that not everybody has had this. And to have 1 billion people have this stuff for the first time, and that's all happening 3 years ahead of official estimates. They pegged 2015 as the soonest as such a lofty goal could happen. So how did this happen? International aid happened, but the big jump has been in the increased participation of previously isolated countries in international trade. You know how people are always complaining about how they're shipping our jobs overseas? Well, this is where they went. The people had no jobs at all before. And at the boom that swept across, and as the boom that swept across China and India is expected to continue in places like Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, and Rwanda, all the places you previously only heard about in the context of heartbreaking ads begging for donations with some pathetic little kid looking at you are now being able to support themselves. If things continue at this pace, countries like Nepal and Bangladesh would likely see extreme poverty shrink to near non-existent levels. Now, obviously, anything having to do with our economy is subject to change. Often abrupt ones that occur seemingly at random, for instance, China's economic explosion, will slow down. But we're keeping our eye on an overall trend here. And it's looking like as many as 40 countries might be able to eliminate extreme poverty within the next few decades. That's 40 countries, people. That's a lot of people that have been living their whole lives as a third world country with dirt floors and no running water. Again, we take for granted the things we have. Just coming here, we say we tithe to pay the bills. It's like we have a structure around us. Even if the power went out right now, we would still be safe and protected from the elements. Some of these people don't even have a structure around them until now. So we know that it's hard to see in a daily wash of awful headlines and celebrity scandals, but it's undeniable we are slowly getting the civilization thing figured out. We, as a people, as a human race, are finding the resolve within ourselves to do the things that we pray about here on Sundays and in our lives. As the New Thought community, or the airy-fairy group of people we are, wants to say love and light, and sometimes gets discouraged because we don't think it's really happening in the world, and we want to go, what's the point? It is happening. So if the whole world is turning out of poverty, then I guess we as a community, and us as an individual person in that community, can resolve to focus on abundance, resolving to tithe in our community of our time, talent, and treasure, and by virtue of that commitment, create a sea of abundance in our own lives, leading us to an economic freedom that we are all heir to. And maybe overall, 2014 can bring us the fortitude to resolve to do as our sisters weep will be singing tonight and Stand Up for Peace. Today and every day of the new year and every day of our lives. And to be resolute this year about cleaning up our addictions to people, places, or things that would hold us back from ourselves, our relationship to spirit, and to each other. And to firmly set our intentions on tolerating each other more with love and understanding, and with the true spirit of what it feels like to walk in someone else's shoes. With an affirmation of literacy for self and others, that I go within and continue to read the story of me and be willing enough to let you read the story of you to me. And lastly, resolving to come up with a mantra that's louder and more productive than the whining sentences of being broke we perfected last year. And then our prayer for the new year will be humble. And we'll simply say, Spirit, we welcome 2014. Our resolution is simple. We resolve to be free. Thank you. I'll talk to you.
I need to know if things are gonna look up, 'cause I feel us drowning in a sea spilled from a cup. And there is no place safe and no safe place to put my head. And you can feel the world shake from the words that are said. And calling all angels. I won't give up if you don't give up. Oh, calling all you angels. I won't give up if you don't give up. Yeah. Bless all the paths our feet walk to be free. Bless